One, the struggle with saving and financial anxiety. There was a time in my life, and maybe you're living in it right now, when saving money felt impossible, not just hard, but like a foreign language I couldn't learn no matter how hard I tried. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't buying designer clothes or blowing my paycheck on luxury. I was just living. And yet, at the end of every single month, I found myself holding my breath, hoping my debit card wouldn't decline, hoping the rent would clear, hoping nothing unexpected would happen, because if it did, a flat tire, a surprise bill, even a friend's birthday dinner, I had no cushion, no buffer, no backup plan. I was constantly juggling numbers in my head, mentally subtracting groceries before the receipt printed, swiping my card with crossed fingers. It was exhausting. And the worst part, I was making decent money. Not amazing, but enough to be okay. Enough that I should have been building something. But I wasn't. I had almost nothing to show for it. My savings were inconsistent, my habits reactive, and every time I tried to start being better with money, it was like pushing a boulder uphill in the rain. I downloaded budgeting apps. All of them. I made spreadsheets I never looked at again. I promised myself I'd start over every Monday. I'd set big savings goals and get excited for 3 days until life got busy again, or I got discouraged, or I slipped once and threw the whole plan away. And the shame that followed was the worst part, because I wasn't failing due to lack of effort. I was failing despite trying. That feeling of always trying but never gaining ground, that's where the anxiety came from. It wasn't just about money, it was about what money represented: safety, stability, progress. And I had none of it. I felt like I was too far behind to catch up, like wealth was a train that had already left the station, and I was still standing on the platform watching it disappear. I started believing that maybe I wasn't one of those people, the kind who just get it, the kind who save without struggle, the kind who have their lives together. I felt broken, embarrassed, quietly drowning. And yet I kept going. I kept earning, spending, surviving, but never really building. It was like living in financial purgatory. Not destitute, but definitely not free. Always worried, always waiting for something to go wrong. And every new strategy I tried, every book, every video, every financial system, it always felt like too much, too overwhelming, too rigid. And when I couldn't stick to it, I told myself I had failed. Again, it became this toxic cycle. Try, fall off, feel guilty, try harder, burn out, give up, rinse it and repeat. And through it all, the anxiety just kept growing. Not because I was spending tons of money I didn't have, but because I had no control. And that's what I realized eventually. The anxiety wasn't about how much I earned. It was about how out of sync I was with my habits. I had no rhythm, no structure, no momentum. I was trying to fix a lifelong pattern with temporary willpower. And it wasn't working, because willpower fades. Life gets busy. Stress happens. And when you're relying on willpower alone, the moment something goes wrong, and it always does, the whole thing collapses. That is why big strategies never stuck for me, because I didn't need another perfect plan. I needed a way to stop living in chaos, a way to build something stable, something I could sustain, something that would still work when I was tired, when I was distracted, when I didn't feel like it, something that gave me clarity without shame. That's when the idea of small, consistent habits started to click. Because the problem wasn't that I didn't know what to do. The problem was I couldn't do it all at once. I was trying to leap my way out of a hole I dug over years, and that never works. I didn't need a leap. I needed a ladder, a small, manageable, step-by-step way forward. And the first step was simply acknowledging the chaos, looking it in the eye, owning it, not with guilt, but with honesty. Saying to myself, I'm here, it's messy, but I'm ready to do something different. Not huge, not dramatic, just different. And from there, everything began to shift. Not because my income doubled or some opportunity dropped into my lap, but because I finally stopped chasing motivation and started building habits. But I'll get to that soon. For now, I want you to know this. If you're in the middle of the chaos, if you're trying and falling and trying again, if you feel like money is a mountain you'll never climb, you're not broken. You're just out of rhythm. And rhythm can be rebuilt. It starts with something small, and sometimes it starts with something as simple as 5. 2. The simple $5 habit. One day, and I'll never forget this because it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't planned, it didn't even feel like a breakthrough at the time. I sat there feeling completely exhausted by my own patterns, fed up with the cycle of trying to change everything, and ending up right back where I started. And I made a quiet decision. I told myself, what if instead of trying to change everything, I just changed one thing? No more perfect budgets, no more massive goals, just one thing. And the simplest, smallest thing I could think of was this: save $5 a day. That's it, just $5. No pressure, no overthinking. Just make a habit of putting $5 somewhere that I couldn't touch it every single day. I chose that number not because it would make me rich, but because it was small enough that I had no excuse not to do it. It didn't require budgeting. It didn't require discipline. It didn't even require me to feel particularly motivated. Just $5 about the cost of a coffee. And instead of doing it manually, which I knew I'd eventually forget or skip, I automated it. I set up a recurring daily transfer from my checking account to a separate savings account at a completely different bank. One with no card, no easy access, no app on my phone. I wanted it out of sight and out of mind. I didn't even check the balance for weeks. That first day, I didn't feel powerful. I didn't feel like a new person. I just felt neutral, but I did it. And then I did it again the next day, and the next. And suddenly, for the first time in years, I had a financial habit that was consistent. It was so small, it felt effortless, but it was daily. And that rhythm, that tiny bit of control I was exercising, it started doing something bigger than I expected. After about 2 weeks, I realized I was no longer in a constant panic about money. I still had the same income. I still had bills, but something inside me had started to settle because I was finally doing something. And that something, no matter how small, was consistent. That 5 wasn't just money, it was proof. Proof that I could keep a promise to myself. Proof that I could take action without needing to overhaul my entire life. Proof that momentum could start with the tiniest shift. After 30 days, I had saved 150 without even noticing the sacrifice. And when I checked that savings account and saw the balance, I almost teared up. Not because it was a lot of money, but because it was the first time in a long time that I had followed through on something related to money. And that meant more to me than any dollar amount. So I kept going. And slowly something began to shift in the way I thought about myself. I stopped seeing myself as someone who could never stick with it. I started becoming someone who does small things consistently. That identity shift was huge, and it didn't come from reading a book or making a vision board. It came from $5 a day, from showing up, from following through. And the longer I stuck with it, the more that small habit bled into other parts of my life. I started asking myself, what else can I automate? What else can I make simple, small, and repeatable? It became a philosophy, one that taught me that the path to wealth isn't made up of dramatic leaps, but of tiny, intentional decisions repeated over time. Looking back now, I realized that $5 habit wasn't about the money. It was about reclaiming power. It was about building trust in myself. Because the truth is, when you've broken promises to yourself so many times, you don't need motivation. You need a win, a small, simple win that proves you are capable of change. And that's what this habit gave me. It gave me a win every single day. No matter how chaotic life got, no matter what the market was doing, no matter what my paycheck looked like, $5 was always possible. And with every transfer, I wasn't just saving, I was building belief, building consistency, building a new story about who I was and how I handled money. And all of it, all the growth, all the mindset shifts, all the quiet peace I started to feel around money began with something so small it almost didn't feel real. But that's the lesson. Sometimes the smallest steps end up being the ones that change everything. 3. The power of consistency over intensity. What started as just $5 a day, the simplest, quietest commitment I had ever made to myself slowly turned into something far bigger than I expected. And not just in terms of numbers, though the numbers alone were powerful. When you save $5 a day, it doesn't feel like much. It's the price of a snack, a cheap coffee, or something you might accidentally spend without thinking. But day by day, it adds up. That $5 became $35 a week. That $35 became around $150 a month. And before I knew it, without any pain, without feeling like I was depriving myself, I had saved over $2,800 in a year. And it hit me like a wave. I didn't hustle for it. I didn't grind or sacrifice my lifestyle. I just showed up consistently. I let time and habit do the heavy lifting. And that's when I understood something that no finance book ever truly drilled into me before. Consistency beats intensity. Every single time. I used to think the way to get ahead was to go all in, to have money makeover weekends where I'd set up 18 new goals, try to restrict every expense, cut out all joy, and treat my finances like a boot camp. And every time I did that, I'd feel burned out within days. I was trying to sprint my way to a finish line that didn't exist. But the $5 habit showed me another way, a sustainable way, a way that felt light, forgiving, doable. And more than that, it started to build something even more valuable than a growing savings account, identity. The more I followed through on this small habit, the more I started seeing myself differently. Not as someone who struggled with money, not as someone who always fell off, but as someone who saves, as someone who is responsible, as someone who follows through. That shift from trying to be better to becoming better is everything. And it didn't come from a dramatic moment or a financial windfall. It came from repetition, from proof, from small daily wins that compounded into a new version of me. It was no longer just about the money, it was about momentum. That $5 a day wasn't just growing my bank balance, it was rebuilding my self-trust. It was giving me back a sense of control that I had lost. For so long, I felt like life was happening to me. Bills, emergencies, stress. I was always reacting. But now I had this one corner of my world that was solid, steady, mine. And when you feel like you can trust yourself again, when you feel like you can count on you, everything starts to shift. You breathe a little deeper. You walk a little taller. You make decisions from a place of calm, not panic. That's what this habit gave me. Not just cash in the bank, but clarity in my mind. And once you have that, once you've tasted that sense of financial stability, even in a small way, you want to keep going. You want to stack another habit. You want to protect the peace you've created, because now you're not just someone who wants to build wealth. You're someone who already is. One day, one habit, one $5 decision at a time. Compounding habits. Once the $5 habit became part of my rhythm, not something I had to remember, not something I had to fight to maintain, but something I just did, it unlocked something unexpected. Space. Space in my mind, space in my schedule, space in my life to try something more. You see, when one habit sticks, it frees up energy. You're no longer spending mental bandwidth debating whether to take action. You're doing it automatically. That's the magic of habit. It eventually stops being a decision and becomes your default. And once that $5 a day felt automatic, I started to ask myself, what's the next small win I can stack on top of this? I didn't want to rush or overwhelm myself. I'd done that before and crashed every time. So I stayed small, intentional, simple. The next habit I built was a weekly expense review. Just once a week, usually Sunday mornings. I'd pour a cup of coffee, open my banking app, and scroll through the week's transactions. No judgment, no shame, just awareness. I asked, where did my money go this week? I didn't need a perfect spreadsheet. I didn't need to cut everything. I just needed to see, and that habit alone brought more clarity into my life than any budgeting software ever had. Because when you see where your money is going, your choices naturally shift. It's not about restriction. It's about alignment. From there, I added another small habit, reading one page of a personal finance book every morning. Not a chapter, not a whole book in a weekend, just one page. One simple idea per day. Some days it was a reminder. Other days it was a new insight. But the real benefit wasn't the knowledge, it was the mindset. That page was a daily anchor that kept me focused on growth. It reinforced that I was on a journey, that I was training my mind just like I was training my habits. After that, I added a 24-hour delay rule to my purchases. I created a simple note in my phone called think before buying. Anytime I felt the urge to buy something that wasn't food, fuel, or an absolute necessity, I had to write it down and wait 24 hours. No checkout, no exceptions. This one change saved me hundreds of dollars within weeks. More importantly, it taught me to separate wanting from needing. And slowly but surely, these micro habits started stacking. They weren't overwhelming. Each took less than 5 minutes, but together they became a system, a behavioral rhythm that started to run without my constant attention. These weren't hacks, they were anchors. Small actions that grounded me in a new identity. One that said, I don't just want wealth. I behave like someone who builds it. Every action became a vote for that identity. Every transfer, every page, every moment of delayed gratification reinforced the new mindset. Wealth is not built by force, it's built by behavior. Not by willpower or motivation, but by daily alignment with your future self. I no longer needed to convince myself I was getting better with money. I believed it because I was proving it. And the most beautiful part? None of it was dramatic. There were no big swings, no spreadsheets on the fridge, just small, quiet, consistent actions, stacked one on top of the other, until they formed a system that started taking care of me. I didn't need to be perfect. I just needed to show up. And the more I showed up, the more I trusted myself. The more I trusted myself, the more I wanted to keep showing up. That's how it compounds. That's how behavior becomes momentum. And that momentum, it becomes wealth in every sense of the word. 5, mindset shift. From surviving to building. At some point along this journey, and it didn't happen all at once, it snuck up on me quietly. I realized something had fundamentally changed. I was no longer reacting to money. I wasn't scrambling at the end of every month, hoping I hadn't overspent. I wasn't waking up in a sweat, wondering if a payment had bounced or if I'd forgotten something important. I wasn't pretending not to see the bank app on my phone because I was afraid of what the balance might show. Instead, I was building. And that shift from surviving to building was everything. It changed the entire tone of how I showed up for my life. I wasn't just hoping for peace anymore. I was creating it. Slowly, intentionally, brick by brick. The $5 habit, the Sunday check-ins, the delayed purchases, all of those tiny actions had started stacking up into something I never had before. A foundation. A system I could lean on, even on hard days. And the most incredible part? My income hadn't drastically increased. I wasn't suddenly rich. I didn't land a dream job or get a surprise inheritance. But my net worth began to grow, not because of how much I earned, but because of how intentionally I handled what I already had. I was no longer waiting for more to feel secure. I was becoming secure through structure, through rhythm, through ownership. The money I once felt powerless around was now something I was in a relationship with, not as an enemy, but as a partner. I started automating what I used to forget. I started planning for what I used to fear. I started choosing with clarity what I once avoided out of confusion. And with every bit of intentionality I practiced, something deeper was happening. My confidence was growing. Slowly at first, but steadily. I wasn't questioning every decision anymore. I wasn't second-guessing every purchase or feeling guilty for every moment of rest. I was no longer living in fear of the next expense, the next emergency, the next surprise, because I had margin, I had momentum, I had trust in myself. And that kind of confidence, the kind that's built, not borrowed, is powerful. My decisions got smarter, not because I suddenly became a financial genius, but because I had space to think, because I was no longer drowning in constant stress. That mental clutter was clearing. And as that anxiety faded, I found something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. Freedom from the shame of financial pasts. freedom from the chaos of paycheck to paycheck thinking, freedom to dream again, not as an escape, but as a plan. I had always thought that peace would come when I had enough, but I was wrong. Peace didn't come from having more. It came from becoming more. And that started with a mindset shift. From scarcity to structure, from reaction to creation, from survival mode to builder mode. I wasn't waiting for life to feel easier. I was choosing to lead it with intention. And that, more than any dollar figure, any spreadsheet, or savings milestone, is what truly made me wealthy. 6. Real-world transformation. After 12 to 24 months, and yes, it really took that long, because real change doesn't rush, it roots. Something unbelievable happened. Something I once thought belonged only to other people slowly became mine. My emergency fund, fully funded, not theoretical, not halfway there, not dependent on my next paycheck. It was sitting there, quietly, like a safety net I had always dreamed of, but never thought I could build. And it didn't come from a big win or some magical opportunity. It came from that small, 5 daily rhythm I'd stuck to, even when it felt boring, even when life got busy, even when no one else was watching. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the unexpected. I had margin. I had breathing room. But that was just the beginning. That same $5 habit, that tiny spark of consistency, gave me the confidence and clarity to do more. I started learning about investing, not in a rushed or overwhelming way, but just one page, one video, one term at a time. And once I understood the basics, I took action. I opened my first small investment account. It wasn't huge. I wasn't putting in thousands. But I was in the game. I had shifted from someone who hoped money would work for me someday to someone who was actively making that happen today. That account started growing, slowly, silently, but it was working. And that planted a new seed. Ownership. Literal ownership. Because not long after that, I made my first asset purchase. Something I had dreamed of, but never believed I could actually do. Whether it was a small piece of land, a used car I paid for in full, or a piece of equipment that could generate side income, it didn't matter. What mattered is this. I went from being someone who had nothing saved, who lived in constant anxiety, who avoided bank apps like they were haunted, to someone who owned something, someone who was building wealth, not waiting for it, someone who had real tangible proof that slow, consistent action beats every crash diet, every get-rich-quick idea, every all-or-nothing mindset out there. And the most surreal part of all of it, I could trace every single step of that transformation. The calm, the clarity, the systems, the growing net worth, the foundational shift in who I was, back to one single habit. That first $5 daily transfer. That one great quiet promise to myself that I actually kept. That one decision that felt so small, it almost felt pointless. But it wasn't, because in that moment, without realizing it, I wasn't just saving money, I was saving myself. I was rewriting the story. I was showing up for the future version of me before she even existed. And now she's here. She's real, and she's living the results of a choice that started not with a giant leap, but with a tiny step. You don't need a raise to build wealth. You don't need a 6-figure job, a financial degree, or a dramatic overnight success. You need rhythm. You need something you can do every single day, even when life gets busy, even when motivation runs out. Because wealth doesn't come from sudden leaps. It comes from quiet consistency, from showing up for yourself in small ways that compound over time. And sometimes the beginning of everything, the first spark that changes your trajectory, isn't found in some breakthrough idea or complicated system. Sometimes it's just $5 a day. That's it. $5. Less than a fast food combo. Less than a movie ticket. But when done with intention, that daily choice becomes a vote for your future self. A signal to your brain, I'm building something now. And that consistency builds momentum. That momentum builds confidence. And that confidence, it turns into clarity, into peace, into net worth. So if you're waiting for the perfect moment to start, don't. Start now. Start small. Start with $5. Because the truth is, you're not just saving money. You're proving to yourself that you can be the kind of person who builds wealth daily.